Welcome to Authenticity FM, episode 38. I am Corey Spiegel, joined with my friends and co hosts Mike Sable and Phil Corrali. It is officially summer in the Midwest. It was only a balmy 90 today with 60% humidity, which made it feel like more than 100 outside. And Mike may or may not currently have air conditioning. So, this episode, it's going to feel like a Midwestern salad. Maybe Jello salad, pasta salad, potato salad. I don't know. But what I do know is somehow when those recipe cards get made and you look at them and you're like, I don't know if that's going to work. That's this episode. We're going to talk about discernment and truth. We'll see you on the other side. All right. It's a balmy, like 90 something here still, a little toasty outside. And I don't know why that has me thinking about summer potlucks and pool parties. Maybe that was the photo you sent earlier in the week, Phil, that inspired me. But I was thinking about how find your recipe or go into your grocery store, like salads in the Midwest. And we're not talking like the healthy lettuce salads. We are talking about there is some heavy cream substance at the base of this kind of salad here in the Midwest is just magical. And as I started to sketch out what an idea for this episode was, that was my inspiration. You get all these weird things put together and you wonder if it's going to work. And so that is how we're going to approach this episode. But I want to start with reading for you guys the text I sent last week. And I was working on writing and researching something. And I just left you with this little brain teaser. And that's where I want to start today. And so it's how do we develop discernment in a world where multiple truths are operating simultaneously? And so I know you've both had some time to think about that, and we've had little side conversations about different topics. But whether you want to start with discernment or the idea that there are multiple truths, let's dive in.
So, all right, I'll throw a couple of thoughts out on the table. Haven't there always been multiple truths, right? I think the struggle that we have um in the work that we do is that people are going to experience things in the way that they experience them. And so they're going to see things that other people don't see. That doesn't make the things that they've seen less true. It just makes it something that colors their experience. So the hard part, I think, is when in this salad that we're going to talk about, I will do the Minnesota salads little catch line thing that she does on Instagram a little bit later. Um, when all of those truths get mixed together, I think the struggle that we have is when we're talking about public policy, particularly, how do we discern the things that are um, not untrue necessarily, but the most important components of that truth from the standpoint of good policy, good government, effective and thoughtful, considered things. And I think that's the hard part, getting harder part, because there's so much noise around what that individual truth is, and it often tips into absolutism, right? I've seen this, I've experienced this, so it must be the only thing that's out there. There couldn't possibly be another perspective. And it's not so much us not seeing multiple truths as individuals not seeing multiple truths. And so we are then put into that awkward middle space, like in those Jello mold things, that middle space that no one really knows why it's there, but it kind of makes for a pretty thing. That's us there in the middle, trying to figure out. I'm going to really lean in on this analogy, Corey. It's really fun. Um, Us trying to figure out what those how to pull the pieces of that together to understand what's really going on and the experiences that people are having. That's getting harder. I think the age of social media, which we talk a lot about, has made it difficult. But it's the way that I think people, again, perceive their experiences and their truths that make it so hard for them to see other sides of that story.
Corey, you have introduced something that was too hard for me to comprehend until yesterday. And so I will offer in my work context. So we had a council meeting last night. We had our 2025 annual public safety report from the police department, and they were talking about all of our police data that exists, right? Calls for service and response times and call volumes and use of force and arrests and DWIs and reams and reams and reams and reams of data that was part of the presentation. And I had, as I said to the council, right? So data is just data. It is not, it doesn't have good or bad. However, the people reading it have lived experiences that are different. And so they do assign a value to that. Like, so, if a data set has a higher proportion of arrests in this population group, and you're in that population group, you might jump to the conclusion that says, you know what? See, I told you the police are targeting me or us. The other people see it and they don't have that same perspective. And so same set of data, half a dozen truths in that piece. And so it does um, force us as sort of, we are the stewards of democracy. And so one of the things that we do is create the platform for the discussion and say, let's unearth those perspectives, not choosing one over the other, but having a discussion about what would that mean then. And so in our case, like we saw a higher incidence of DWI arrests in a particular racial ethnic community. And a police chief said, well, that actually, we don't want to arrest people for DWI. We want to prevent people from getting in the car behind the wheel while impaired. So let's do outreach into these bars where this group frequents. And I was like, okay, that's how it actually works, is you have to do acknowledge what the data is and then say, here's what we're going to do differently going forward. And I think that is, as we're, stewards of democracy, we frame that discussion in context for the council and don't hide away from what the data is, because it is actually neutral. It's the perceptions of people's and their lived experiences that inform how they interpret it. And so we'll dive into this a little bit because there's a professor at the University of North Carolina that I want to reference later, because these are not new issues. And they just kind of manifest sort of differently. So I'm looking forward to today.
So, as you were kind of talking about that, and we had talked about it offline a little bit, I wonder if part of this challenge, this idea that there are multiple truths, and we've talked about third places and how people used to convene and communicate, right? That has become online. The algorithms make sure you see more of what you like. And so I think while it's very noisy, it's really an echo chamber. And I've noticed that. I've been watching a lot on social media lately, what I see more of and why. And it made me think about, so school's out, it's officially summer, but I take my son to school every morning, and the drop off lane. So his middle school is under construction. The district's doing a beautiful renovation and expansion to the middle schools here in town, but it's an active construction site. And so the drop off lane is about a third of the size as it used to be, and the parking is all consumed by the trades in the morning. So it's a little chaotic. And every morning without fail, there is one or two or three cars parked in the drop off lane, which then creates this conflict between people trying to do drop off the right way, right? The way the rules are set, and then people doing the through lane and doing drop off there. And so it creates chaos. And I tell that story because I think we forgot collectively that some systems are here to create order. And because I want to do what I want to do and what's most convenient for me in the moment, right? This individualization that our country is very famous for, and probably on the leading edge of that in Western cultures. We forgot that my truth, and Mike, we can probably dive into it later. You and I often talk about city management being easy versus hard based on our experiences, and that both of those can be true. And so I think that's what has gotten lost a little bit along the way, is the idea that, yeah, all of these things can be true to the person who's holding that belief. And why we're choosing not to entertain or understand it is, I think, really an important place for inquiry to start.
So, um, something that comes to mind as you were telling that story, Corey, is that it feels the social media echo chamber. We talk about that a lot, but it isn't always social media either. There are neighborhood groups, there are text groups, there are mom groups. That they glom onto something. There are dad groups too. Sorry, I've seen those too. They glom onto something, and suddenly it's a viral belief, and it's so easy for them to stop trusting other information. So the information that perhaps a school is putting out about whatever, the information that um, the library or the unit of government is putting out, they have created narrative around that information that, in some cases, actually twists the information that was put out. And so now you develop a different set of understandings, and it is no longer um, just an individual's truth; it's a group's truth, and that group now carries it forward, and they will show up at a council meeting, or um, they will push back on social media or in other ways to basically say, we don't believe what you're saying. Actually, we think you're lying. Actually, we don't trust anything that you're telling us. And it's not because they've discerned that from their own analysis of the information that has been put together, but because this conversation has drawn them into a similar set of perspectives. And what I have found is that it's really difficult, if not fully impossible, to insert logic or the logical set of facts that we really want to live by. Right? That's our truth, right? The logical set of facts. We've discerned lots of information. We have analyzed it, and we've put it forward. And a lot of the time they don't care, right? That's the problem that we then are faced with. And then our elected officials look at us and say, well, how does that perspective comport with what you've analyzed? And then in some cases, there's no relationship between those two things, because it is not the process to arrive at that understanding was groupthink, not discernment. And I think that's happening everywhere. It's happening whether we're talking about our units of government or we're talking about our families. Those kinds of interactions are becoming more and more difficult. And so what's happening is this us versus them growth that's kind of been there for a while and has been getting more and more pronounced. Um, in some cases, comes to a head on a certain particular issue, and now everything comes into question. And it's somewhat fascinating to me to watch that happen and see how quickly it can happen around something where people have just kind of agreed with one another. That sounds right. I like that. And yes, that's hyper pushed by a social media algorithm, but it's also hyper pushed by the groups that we're a part of.
So I'm going to jump into a topic that I I think, Phil, what you just sort of described is maybe what many of us in city management are facing right now, and it is this concept of data centers, because there are a lot of camps around data centers, and reflexively, a lot of people just say it just doesn't feel right that these big machines, and that's what they are. They're buildings and machines that eat up a lot of energy and eat up a lot of water, and it just It feels like it's a risk to me and my future because it's going to consume all of these resources. And so I want to dive into data centers because I think it's just super entertaining. And it's probably one of these topics that we talk about is discernment as a city council. Like if somebody proposes a data center, it's right, whether it's a little small one or if it's a massive field of, kind of a server farm, our colleagues are facing this question right now. And so I'm going to try to summarize. Philip Boyle is a professor at the University of North Carolina. He wrote um, sort of this seminal work around public choices and public values. And I'm going to have to read it because I don't have it memorized, but he identified 4 core public values: liberty, the individual right to freedom, choice, and personal expression free from constraint. Okay. Equality, the focus on equality, fairness, and justice so that every resident is treated fairly and has equal rights. Community, the desire for safety, social order, and a shared sense of belonging and connection in the places where people live and work. And prosperity, the economic focus on efficiency, productivity, and a decent quality of life. If you layer a data center on that, right, presumably the people who are developing those things want to make some money from them. This connection to community is twofold, right? So number one, the data center helps us connect digitally, um, but it also creates this weird spot where this space is now consumed and eaten by somebody else. It's taking away other kinds of developments that are there because if you take all the energy and all the water, you can't do other types of development. And it just and then this piece around equity and fairness and justice. Um, it feels like a certain group is taking from another group. And so you've got all of these public values that are kind of in question with one another. And right as the city manager, so you got a room full of people who are, upset that, radio waves and electronic waves are going to, give everybody cancer. And the group's there that says you're going to take all of our water and we're all going to have to move and we're all going to have to leave. And then the developer says, listen, we actually need data centers because people are using data. And so you have to put these things somewhere. And you're kind of wrestling with this like perfect storm of an issue, and no amount of facts and data sets are going to be persuasive in the changing the minds of people. And so I think one of the skills that we're going to have to cultivate, I wish we had done so a few years ago, but like cultivate now, is having conversations and framing conversations around values. And that will make lots of, the city manager types who tend to be engineers and sort of right brain thinkers are going to struggle with this conversation around values. But I do think it's one of the things that we're going to have to talk about, and remind me later to talk about the HPO model, because I think there's a solution there eventually. So data centers, Corey, go.
So when we had talked about this offline, my brain started running around it, right? And so I will say at the outset, I'm sure everyone's seen the Aaron Brockovich map. They're everywhere, but there is a concentration in places that are climate strained. And you're seeing these mega developments out west. There was an article this week about Tucson. We've seen stuff about Utah. And if you haven't seen, there is this huge national narrative about the Colorado River water allocation and its current capacity, which is at like 23%. So we're at critical infrastructure issue standpoint in that whole water basin, which is also the source of a lot of our food in this country. And so when you think about that, so as I'm rolling through it and with economic development as the background, not every deal is a good deal. And that is really hard to get some councils, especially councils that are on shorter terms or are maybe in distressed communities, to really get comfortable with. Because, and I remember the eras here in the Quad Cities where any development was good development because it was development, which is better than the alternative of disinvestment. But that's not true. And so I think at the outset, there is way too much capital being deployed into data centers way too fast. And when you think about these construction sites and even the evolution of technology, by time one gets built, some of the technology it was built for is already obsolete. And then the other thing I started to think about, so in Iowa, the governor signed a bill. The tax structure has changed again. It's changed, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times just in my, decade and a half here. And every time it's been lessening the burden to the resident and the business, which means lessening the revenue to the governments. And in a state where, let's say, data centers are a really property tax heavy thing, and then all of a sudden the legislature decides, we're going to exempt personal property tax. And those servers likely are categorized under personal property tax instead of physical property. All of a sudden, that giant revenue stream that you thought you were gaining is gone, right? And so there are all these different policy things. And then think about, for those of us who have dealt with redeveloping a mall, the indoor mall's dead. What happens when the data center becomes obsolete? Much like all the food factories in the Midwest became obsolete. They're really hard to redevelop. And so I think a really important aspect right now for all communities, regardless of size, is to really think about the horizon of this. Sewer capacity, water capacity, electrical capacity. I saw an article here in Iowa where one of the data centers is creating this huge traffic congestion in farm country. Like, there are just these competing interests based on value. And at the end of the day, for a city manager, for a city council, for the staff, what's the real so what? Because a company wants to build something, yes, private property rights are real, but it doesn't mean you have to incentivize it, and zoning exists for a reason.
So going back to Mike's comment about the conversations around values, I think the hardest part about this particular issue, or nearly any land use issue generally, is that you can have that conversation until the issue is in front of you. And all that awareness of what our community values are can go out the window because you're enchanted, or you loathe the idea, right? It's everything feels very polar. There isn't a whole lot of gray in the middle. I kind of think they're okay. Oh, maybe those data centers are terrible, but maybe I'm gonna remain open-minded. There's not a lot of room for open-mindedness in our processes anymore. And I think about it from the standpoint of the public hearing process, right? So we all have these, they're all in place. Our codes require them. Often statute requires them, depending upon what you're talking about. And so you have these public hearings, and we expect people to show up and know what to do in a public hearing, right? Because somehow we understand it, so they therefore do as well. And guess what? Nobody understands what a public hearing is. Frankly, nobody understands what a public meeting structure looks like. What do you mean I only have 3 minutes to speak? What do you mean I have to be sworn in? What do you mean I have to tell you where I live? No, I don't. I don't feel like I have to do any of those things. I don't want to do those things. This is how I feel. You should just listen to me as long as I want to talk to you about it. And so the struggle also is you can build community awareness of the values and the things that make your community what it is. And I think in a vacuum, those are really easy to see. They become nearly invisible when a hot button subject is in front of a community, because people lose their minds. They lose their ability to discern. They see singular truths. They don't see multiple truths. They don't recognize that there may be another perspective that they should consider, because they're so passionately feeling about whatever it is that they can't step away from that. And so those values go out the window in the first public hearing.
I'm going to take us on a weird tangent, and I promise that it might be relevant. So, Phil, well, you said something, right? That you talked about the perspective taking. As you guys know, so I used to coach softball, my girls softball, and it's just one of the great joys in life. And there invariably there'll be a close play at a play, and the umpire will call it safe or out, right? Those are the two choices. And there was a play that I felt compelled to walk out and said, I think you missed that one. She was clearly safe." And he smiled and he looked at me and he said, "I understand that. I saw it differently." And he left me with this just hanging there, like I could not argue back. I was not going to change his mind. I was not going to win the day. The play was going to be the play because he used the words, "I saw it differently." And I think there is some tremendous value in being able to frame up conversations about you can be opposed to data centers because of all of these valid, good reasons why that's a concern. And an appropriate response is, I see it differently, right? I see the economic value. I see the connective value. I see the property tax value. I see all of these things that are there. And so I think one of the things I would ask our profession to kind of get at is the next time we have or start planning conferences is start having conversations about having a little bit thicker skin, a little bit sort of tougher mindset to say, I understand that perspective and I saw it differently or I see it differently. Because it's a sign of respect to say, okay, I will respect and honor your perspective, even though I might not share it. At least I can understand it and then articulate it differently for that. So that's a weird tangent.
No, it's a good tangent, and I think particularly with what you just said about thick skins, um, I think it's really hard when you have thoughtful, considered staff reports get ripped to shreds by my own research. And I've seen it in my team and in other teams where they struggle to contain their frustration with what they have just been said, what they've just been told, right? Your work, your life's work, you have an advanced degree in engineering, but I don't agree with your engineering. It's wrong. You know how I know? Because I looked it up, and that's what Google told me. Right. And so all of a sudden, this staff member is like, "What the hell are you don't know what you're talking about. Like you haven't looked at the data. You haven't, calculated it out. You don't know the traffic counts. You don't know that whatever, right? And that thick skin is really hard well, that's kind of a funny way of saying it. That thick skin is not going to always protect you in that moment. And I think the hard part also, and I've had this conversation with folks in the last couple of weeks a lot, is where does that stop? Meaning, where do we stop owning the opinion, the perspective, the staff report so that we don't own it so hard that we now are in a space of, I am right and you are wrong, just like we're being told. Don't we have to find the space where we elevate ourselves away from that and say, look, I have presented to you to the best of my ability information. It is now yours to understand. I'm not going to defend it to the death. I'm going to own it and say, this is what I did based off of my best efforts, my best awareness of the situation. That's incredibly hard to do when you're being told by somebody that you don't know what you're talking about, even though you've been doing this for 20 years. And I've been studying it by reading things on the internet. I think that's the other struggle when we talk about hot button subjects is for the staff not to get pulled into the morass in the middle.
So I want to connect two dots. Mike, you used the word equity and values, and Phil, you were talking a lot about systems and structures. And I think as we've talked about disruption and kind of the evolution of government, from my perspective, I think something that's happened, all of these systems and structures. So there is a land use case, I think it's a ZBA case in the field behind my house. And so I get the standard form government mailer to my house, right? Because the systems and structures were built many decades ago now, on the idea that everyone gets something mailed to their house and they have to come to P&Z or ZBA or council, and it's a one-time bite, and that those systems were built for very good reasons. Like you had to have a funnel for input and standing, and because everything gets litigated nowadays, it had to be defensible. But that's not how the world transacts information anymore. To your point about neighborhood groups or parent groups or community groups, whatever the thing is, however we convene together, is part of the necessary evolution to really say, we have to fundamentally think about this differently. Maybe we have to accept some risk. The idea that now, in my case, I'm not going to go speak before ZBA. Also, the project happening behind my house, it's fine. It's a religious institution. Some of my neighbors are not happy about it. But for me, great neighbor. Cool. We're great. But it is still a process that was built and refined from probably the 70s. And maybe that's a little bit of the rub we're at is, to your point, flash mobs can happen really, really fast. And they can do a lot of damage really fast because the government can't react nearly as fast as this group of people can.
It's funny that you talk about the mailer because I it actually came up in our council meeting yesterday about, well, they said, well, we mailed it to everybody within 500 feet. And it's like, well, there are 42,000 people who have an opinion about this. We never bothered to tell them this. So it's funny you talk about in the 70s. I mean, I'm sure that there are statutes that were written in the 1870s that we're still complying with, predating all of the communication tools and techniques that ought to be used today. And so it is incumbent on us to then go back and then rewrite those systems, because that's just like, it is ridiculous that we're confining our outreach to people who live within 500 feet of a property line when we have cars and everybody can drive by the thing whenever they want, and they can email everybody on the city council in seconds. And so you're right. We do need to kind of fundamentally redo what that is. And I think for leaders and organizations, yeah, we are going to have to legally comply with the statute and send mailers to the 500 people, but we can also do more outreach. We could do more opportunities for that kind of feedback. And so there's a risk in doing that, but it's more respectful to that resident who might have an opinion or just need a platform. You do have to have deadlines, right? You're going to have there's going to be a meeting on this day and they're going to talk about it. So all of this stuff has to happen before that, but there's no reason why we can't do more than just the minimum when it comes to community.
So I'm going to push back because I think we do more than just the minimum all the time. And I don't know that that's reciprocated in people actually receiving it. My struggle, my frustration is, we can have thousands of people who are signed up for electronic newsletters, who are following social media feeds, who are part of our, advanced reverse 911 systems. And I will tell you, when we have a 6% open rate on those emails that are going out, and we have, a handful of engagements on social media, it says to me that people really don't care until they care. And then it's our fault that we haven't told them that they should care, even though we've been telling them about it for 3 months leading up to that. And I joke about this. This may sound dismissive. It's not intended to be, but it's a frustration that boils up every so often. If I went and stapled a public hearing notice to everyone's forehead, 90% of the people would not know that we shared information with them about that public hearing. And I think part of what we have to understand as communities is that we have a joint and mutual responsibility to one another to be aware of what's happening. And I recognize that people are busy. I recognize that there is a value in saying, you know what, I'm good with it. Everything's fine. I don't have to engage. But then you also have a responsibility to temper your response when something does happen, because you cannot then jump into the space of saying, I was never told, and nobody has shared any information with me. And I had no idea that this possibly could have ever happened. And then when you say, but we've been talking about it for 16 months, and this is the culmination of a lengthy public engagement process, and we're going out into neighborhoods and we are doing informational meetings and open houses and trying and do it, and then you say, I don't care about all of those things. You didn't tell me. Guess what? You stop thinking that doing all of those things and taking all of that time has any value whatsoever. And so you fall back on, well, we mailed it out to everybody 500 feet from the property line. Sorry if you didn't see it.
Anybody who ever did a zoning code rewrite just had like that shiver moment of you spend 3 years on it, you do all the things, you have all the meetings, and then the first rezoning that comes up and everything you just said happens, like verbatim and across cities everywhere. So well done. But I think that is maybe the secret sauce of what great minds working together can start to at least try to figure out, because Facebook notifications or ads is not the thing. Relying on other third-party entities. Now, 20, 30 years ago, the media would have covered it. People read the paper. People were engaged. That's just not the world we live in. And I think of my own experience. I made a joke about, a major arterial closure and a bridge being closed, and they put up the message boards maybe 4 days ahead of this major closure. And so I was talking to somebody and they're like, oh, it's on the website. And I'm like, yeah, because I just routinely go to the city website to get my information, right? And so I think the opportunity for innovation is whoever can crack the code and build the thing, whether it's an app or, not reverse 911, because I get those texts and I don't read them either. But whoever can figure out what the secret sauce is, I think that's the next thing. And as we talk about disruption, there is a next thing. The media as we know it is leaving. If you've watched what happened with 60 Minutes over the past couple of weeks, the world we grew up with is that chapter is closing across many different platforms. And what's next is coming. And we need to be thoughtful and open-minded about trying to help influence it.
We struggle with communications overload in the context of all of that, right? So one of the reasons you don't read those text messages is probably because you get, I don't know, 40 spam text messages a day. One of the reasons we have a 6% open rate on our electronic newsletter is because you probably get 300 emails a day. I currently am struggling to keep my Gmail account at less than 1,000 unopened emails. Like, it doesn't take more than 2 days of not tending to it to have so much overload in information. And so I do want to, point to the fact that I don't think it's generally people's desire to not engage. I think it's really hard to do it well and to find the information where you need it. I do think there are some really good things that have happened over the last half a decade in terms of how cities and towns and villages are communicating with their communities. I think they're using things like podcasting, they're using things like video, vertical video, platforms like TikTok and Instagram that are bringing information into the feeds of people who are consuming it. And so we're doing that kind of thing. It's just that I think we struggle to find the balance and to find the right way of telling our story. Look, government's really good at using big words and acronyms and talking about, the ZBA. To the person who's maybe just tuning in for the first time and they don't know what government is, they don't know what a ZBA is, right? And they don't know what they're for, even if they did know what they were. And so we have lost a lot of awareness. We've lost a lot of civic minded awareness of the things that are going on around us in our communities, in our broader world. And I think it's because there's so much that people turn it off. And so it just becomes harder and harder to get messaging where it needs to go, and to do so in a way that does exactly what Mike was saying before, which is to be inclusive of perspective, is to be inclusive and thoughtful about the things that 40,000 people care about, not 50 people. And so those are struggles in my environment. I see it. I hear it from my team, and I see it myself. But how we can get the stuff that we need to do and not rely on that 1870s process that we put together, which worked really great for about 100 years, and has not worked really well for probably 50 or 60. And here we sit lamenting that we can't get people to talk to us.
So I'm gonna do I think two things. So number one, if you've been through the HPO model and you've been through Leading Edge or its sister previous relationship at the College of Charleston, we talked about the strategic stakeholder value analysis, where you sit down with a team and you're like, okay, who are all of our potential stakeholders that might have an interest in this issue? And you identify, right? It might be the end user. It might be the state agency that's regulating it. It might be a nonprofit partner in the community. It might be, right, the council. You've got all of these stakeholders, and you might have a dozen or so stakeholders, and it's incumbent on us to like pause and think through, like, okay, well, what might they be concerned about? Or who do I know in that group that I can ask questions about, and to kind of to cultivate relationships that say, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing. What's a potential pitfall or what's going to go really well? And you have to invest time in both building the relationship to have that trusted network, and then also reach out to them, because that's where you identify some of these like things that might blow up at the end. And so it does require us to pause and to think a little bit. And then and this is where the discernment part comes in, because ultimately we're going to have to frame a recommendation. And one of those stakeholders, or three of those stakeholders, or a handful of them, are going to be disappointed. And so how we talk to them about the decisions that are getting made also matters quite a bit. So, I found, like, I know you're concerned about this, development creating a bunch of traffic and noise. I acknowledge that that's a real concern, and we're going to try to help mitigate them. But it's also, right, balanced with all of these other perspectives. And so therefore the recommendation is going to be this, because we don't see it exactly the same way. And so I think that's a way to maybe help us get through that. But I'm going to flip the script. This is the second part I was going to say, which is we get trained to be certain about things, right? The engineer does the math and does this, and right, the traffic counts say that, and therefore it's got to be, double through, double rights, double lefts. And it's the intersection is so big you can't throw a baseball across it, and you wind up ruining the character of the neighborhood because engineers just want fast cars. Now, I just exposed a bias in my description of that, because maybe that's unfair, but it drives me crazy that we over-engineer things all the time. And so what you get is these characterless intersections that are just loud and full of cars. So where in your last year, last 6 months, have you changed your perspective based on some feedback? And I'm not saying compromise, but where have you changed how you think about something?
I think my situation's kind of unique because I've had time, and Phil, you and I have talked about this offline. I've had time to think, right? I've actually been able to, in some ways, hit pause on life, which is a rare gift. It really is. And for me, like, I literally wrote a book called Ordinary, which that word is the antithesis of my last 20 years. And I think that's what switched. And we were joking before we started filming that, like, so my dog just had surgery. We're at week 2 of recovery. And I've sat on the couch with him for a week, rewatching old shows and reading a book on occasion and playing games on my phone. Like, I've literally accomplished next to nothing other than playing with the bots a little bit and sending you this crazy question about discernment, which is how this story starts. And part of me feels slightly guilty because I'm not being productive. But then there's a really big part of me that is completely okay with the fact that for 2 weeks, my job is to very carefully help my dog rehab. And my son's home for summer. And so, like, our schedule is very different. And the idea that I have to be productive every minute of the day is something that I've actually let go of because life is really short. And the older I get, the less of it I have left. And I am more interested in the quality of my time than I am in being productive by the way society taught me I should think.
That was a lot more thoughtful than I was going to go down the path, but now I'm reconsidering what I was going to say. I would say that in the last year or so, I have really started to question my perspective on a number of things, question my perspective on why I feel a certain way about certain processes, why I feel a certain way about my own involvement or engagement in certain specific things in my organization. Um, I have started to, with the help of thoughtful others, some of whom may be on this podcast with me, considering what a very important word um, means to me, and that word is no, right? What does a thoughtful no mean when you are feeling tired and overwhelmed by all of the yesing that your brain really pushes you to say? And how do you do that in a way that doesn't bring a shame feeling on yourself, and do so also in a way that you, as Corey was just saying, give yourself the grace to say it's okay for me to advocate for this for me right now. I struggled. I've talked about this a bit when, I've been running a lot every day now for, a lot of days. And when I first started doing that, I really struggled with the fact that, I wasn't going to get to the office 15 minutes before the office opened anymore. Right. And so even though I knew I was going to work through lunch and I was going to stay an hour or two late every day, it was a hard thing to do. But I think that the part of it that has been important for me, and I will say, I feel like this has really only been in the last 6 or so months, is that we owe it to ourselves to make sure that we're doing something that is helpful to our lives in some way. There's a lot of guilt that will come for any number of reasons, and sometimes you have to say, "Mm, that's really an inappropriate feeling because I need to feel better. So I'm going to advocate for myself, and I am going to step away from my desk for 15 minutes and go for a walk. I am going to run in the morning, even though it means I might get to the office 15 minutes late." It does mean that you say, I'm going to take vacation and I'm going to actually not respond to my email while I do it. And I will say, this is coming from a conversation I just had last week. It also means that you have to model it well for those people in your orbit who are looking to you and are expecting you to give them the right answer on what they should do. So if you say, we're not going to book any meetings on Friday so that everybody has a chance to catch up, you better not book any meetings on Friday so that you have a chance to catch up too, because we have a responsibility. And I think it's so easy for us to convince ourselves that those are things that matter for other people and there's not as important for me, but they're 3 times as important, because it's not just for you; it's for everybody who's watching what you're doing, and you're modeling behavior. In all the years that I've been doing this, I still don't see on the regular that I am an influential person. And that's a really dumb perspective for me to carry around, because whether I feel influential or not is irrelevant. I am, because of the position that I have, because of where I am in my organization or in my community. So guess what? It matters what I do. So people are paying attention. They want to see that. And I do think that that's something that, people with chronic imposter syndrome will frequently convince themselves, oh, it doesn't matter. I'll be the person who works themselves to death. Well, other people are going to follow you if you do that. So it's really something that I've been working on and thinking through. That's so important in these days, particularly.
Phil, thank you for sharing that. And so what you just described was a discernment process of, all right, there's a lot of competing things in your own head, right? You want to model professionalism and being early and conscientiousness and being there ahead of the people and after the people. And that's a piece. And then it also then is like, well, I also want to be healthy. I also want to run and I want to exercise. And also I need to model these kinds of behaviors. And so what you just did was the discernment process in your head. No, this is the right thing in this moment for that to occur. And so, I appreciate you sort of articulating that sort of journey, because I think lots of people wrestle with that. And as I shared, like you're super popular with my CIO, and like so I'm sure he's going to talk about this conversation with me after he watches the episode next week. The second part of the thing that I'm going to say is, and it's something you talked about, saying no to something. Um, I had somebody reach out on whatever, one of like LinkedIn or email or whatever, and say, "Hey, we'd love to have you on the podcast." And I was like, "Oh yeah, no, I don't do that. I do my own, but I don't do others." And it was sort of I was talking to a friend today, and she was like, what a super liberating thing to say. Like, you know what you want to do. Like, I don't want to be on somebody else's, but I want to hang out with you guys and talk about what's interesting. And so, uh, that ability to say no. So I'm also going to say congratulations, right? I know that is a struggle for you because you love to do all the things. And so saying no to things is as long as it's a thoughtful discernment about why you're saying no, like that's awesome. Congratulations. I also will say, lastly, number 3 is we previewed this at our one of our last episodes, but you, by the time this airs next week, will be the Midwest representative on the ICMA executive board. We are grateful that you said yes to that one. But you are going to have to start saying no to more things later on. And so I'm glad you're practicing that little bit of muscle about saying no, but congratulations. It's official. Good for you. We're really grateful for it.
I appreciate that. It's one of those things that I would much rather we talk about nearly anything else other than the fact that something has happened in my world. But it is exciting,
Oh, hold
and
on,
uh,
hold on, hold on.
uh,
This is the tie.
yeah,
You said, right? You have this feeling like I'm not influential. Buckle up, buddy. You are.
yeah. Well, it's funny. So I was at the ILCMA conference last week, which was a really great event, well attended, wonderful to see so many colleagues. And we were bidding farewell this year to our executive director, who's been there for my whole career and is just one of the greats in this profession. But the story, we're at one of the social events at the end of the evening on Thursday, and a person walks up to me and they said, they whisper in my ear, it's loud, there's a band playing, and they're like, I couldn't place where I knew I've seen you someplace, and I just couldn't place it. And I was like, yeah. And they're like, on LinkedIn. I've seen you on LinkedIn, but I've never seen you in real life. And we both got a good chuckle out of that. I think the fun part about the opportunities that a platform like LinkedIn provides, or the unique and truly, truly, truly special experience that I will have over the next 3 years, is that I will have the chance to meet more people in real life that I will have the chance to learn about their stories and find out what it is that they're struggling with or their community is struggling with, and to have their experience intermingle with my own. I know that was true for the both of you as you were in those roles and made those connections. And I think as we talk about the things that we've been talking about tonight, it comes back to a point you made a moment ago, Mike, which is that we are inherently responsible for building connection, right? We have to find ways to meet people where they are. We have to find ways to understand and to seek to understand, even if we don't, to seek to understand, to learn about that perspective, about why it is a person feels the way that they feel. I know in a role like I will be taking on that I'm going to hear feedback about what ICMA is or isn't, the things that it's doing or isn't doing. And it's important for me that I have the opportunity to hear those perspectives, because that will guide my own service to this profession in a way that is hopefully going to have impact and have value to what ICMA is doing. But obviously, it's an amazing organization. There's lots happening. We'll all be together in Long Beach in October, and I'm very much looking forward to standing on that stage with some of my wonderful colleagues who are likewise going to be serving the profession.
So I'll add congrats to the entire incoming class. You will start to understand how weird it is to call yourself the class of 2029. And right now that feels really far away. And all of a sudden you're going to have a closet full of vests and quarter zips that say like class of 2029. And so I'm the class of 24 and you're like, that was a long time ago already. So they will tell you when you do orientation, this is for the whole class, it goes like that. It really does go super, super fast. I want to pull a couple threads together. So, Phil, you talked about LinkedIn. We joke with you a lot about LinkedIn. And there have been some kind of competing narratives lately. So we call this podcast Authenticity FM. We have real conversations when the camera is recording that are very, very similar to when the camera is not recording or when we're just on the phone with each other. But there's been, I'll call it, different truths that have been expressed, especially on LinkedIn lately, about the fact that people are talking too openly or maybe too negatively about the profession. And then there are other people saying, but we need to be honest about what's happening. If nobody says that counsel behaviors have consequences and we just sweep all of it under the rug, nothing ever changes. And then one of Phil, your and my favorite topics to banter about is kind of the city manager as influencer. And I probably have a more traditional perspective on kind of professional staff and the role of the electeds and how information gets shared than maybe the whole industry is moving. And so I kind of want to throw the idea that the role of city manager is evolving and the role of city manager as messenger is evolving. And there are a lot of truths that people are sharing right now on that topic. And I'd love to hear your perspectives.
I'm going to start and then Mike's going to continue, or Mike can start and I'll continue. But the one thing so I will say it this way. I have never in my presence on LinkedIn found myself to be in some way an influencer, because I don't like that word. I think it's a weird way of kind of pigeonholing people. Look, we owe it to ourselves as a profession to talk about things that are difficult, right? And I think we do it somewhat well, somewhat regularly. We also owe it to ourselves to not be overly self-loathing. We did this on purpose to ourselves. We have the benefit of choice in professions, and we don't have to do this. And I will say, I said this to somebody last week. I've been doing this for nearly 25 years, um, which is terrifying to say out loud, but I've been doing this for nearly 25 years, and there isn't a month that I've been doing it where I haven't questioned whether I think I should anymore. And I think there's a lot of people who question their choice in career. I think that's totally normal and fine. And I think part of what I have derived value from the dialogue around city management on LinkedIn as a good example has been the fact that I am, first of all, not the only person who struggles with the things that I go through, right? That's a professional struggle. We all do it. Some more acutely than others, but I think struggle exists as kind of a constant. But also, I actually derive value in feeling like I can keep doing it because I know other people are too. And so, where I like the sharing of stories, and look, I don't agree with everything I read either, but what I like about it is that people are sharing their perspective, their understanding of the issues that they are working their way through. I don't love it when we paint a professional without a whole lot of understanding about what they've gone through. And I think actually, as a profession, we're better at that than others. We don't eat our own in the way that I've seen that with others. But um, my goal with talking about what it is that I see is to not rose-colored glasses the profession. It's hard, but I like to try to find some balance in the hard with the rewarding, because it is. Um, but it's not for everybody, and it's not. I don't want to be a false cheerleader. There's tough stuff that we are working through in a way that I don't think we ever expected to have to when we started this. And, I'm preaching to the choir with this group, but that is an aspect of the work, and we can choose to do it or not, from my perspective.
I'm struck with so many things. So you said so many things that I wanted to argue about.
Cool. Yes.
In
Oh,
the
it's about
thing.
time.
We haven't
Yay.
done that. We haven't done that in a while. And so
Yeah.
I you talked about you don't like the word influencer, right? And I get it because it feels like it's right. Again, it's the going back to the right selling cheap garage sale stuff that's mispriced, and like it's people who haven't done the work trying to sell their stuff within the LinkedIn platform and then try to like get money from it. Like, and I can name three of them right now off the top of my head, and I won't, but it just feels weird. Like you're not actually in this thing, but you talk like you are. And so my red flags are going off. Like I feel like I'm being sold something, and that's influencer for profit. What you are doing is not influencer for profit. You are doing it for influencer as to shape a conversation around leadership. And so Peter Drucker's got this famous sort of thing like the only definition of a leader is someone who has followers. And that's right. I mean, Peter Drucker's probably the greatest management thinker of the 20th century, followed closely by Jim Collins, who studied under Peter Drucker. So, I mean, there's this great lineage of thinkers. And so there are people who need to share what they think in order to attract followers. And I think that's what you are doing. You're not attracting followers so you can, right, sell the latest thing or get the most clicks on a LinkedIn profile. So I challenge your framing of that question because I think you're how do I say this? Misjudging your value when you use different words.
So it's a weird. I think influencer is a dumb word because I agree with you. I think it's a bastardized word. I think the problem is that it's a culture when it shouldn't necessarily be. Like and maybe that's again a rose-colored glasses view of what social media is. But there is uh, the fact of the matter is it drives me crazy when things are falsified. and perspective is created that doesn't really exist, and you're using AI to kind of generate a post. So yeah, you get those clicks, you get those impressions, whatever it is that you're seeking to get. And believe me, there's a dopamine rush that comes from my own posting. I'm not that altruistic. Um, but at the end of the day, I also am not going to talk about things that I don't believe in, right? If I'm going to put something online, it's going to be because I believe in it, or it's because it's something that has struck me, or it's something that's real. And I think that's where, I'll accept the premise of your point that there is a difference between fake and real. Um, I think the hard part is maybe seeing the difference between fake and real, and following the difference between fake and real. And I'm not saying that people should suddenly be following me because I'm real. That's not what I'm saying at all. Please don't, from that standpoint alone. It's social media is not designed to be real. And I think part of where I want to see us push back is to say, sorry, this really does suck sometimes. And guess what? This really doesn't suck all the time. So let's actually be real about the stuff that we're working through, as opposed to the woe is me, or the, oh my God, everything is perfect and wonderful, and I'm living in the greatest professional environment that I could ever possibly be. I guess that's where I'm at.
So I have to cut in for a second. When you're saying I'm real, I had a total 90s Gen X flashback to Jennifer Lopez and that hook she sings. And it's now like looping through my brain. But I think there's nuance between influencer and influential. And from my perspective, I see it as what's the intention or what's the motivation. And I think back to our word of choice, which I think is going to be with us for a while this summer, discernment. It is very easy to discern what someone's intention is based on pattern, not a one-off, right? So, Phil, we've been LinkedIn friends for a long time. Mike, your social media is not your jam, right? You talked about how there's a lot of noise in the world that you just don't consume, which is great. So I think there's nuance between those words, but it gets back to, you can be influential as a steward of the profession, because right now it needs that. But there are also people who are being very opportunistic, and I'm not naive to how business happens. And it's very noticeable right now too. And so I think that's the challenge of navigating that line right now is really being able to understand intention based on kind of the horizon of behavior.
I have to say a couple of things. Well, I don't have to. I'm choosing to say a couple of things. I've discerned that I want to say a couple of things, to use like a little bit of a pun. So there are a lot of hanging topics or hanging questions that came out of this conversation. So I feel like we are at the start of some sort of summer series on discernment and summer series around influential versus influencing. Um, and Corey, you said a word that made me think of something that you and I talked about offline, which is, right. And I'll paraphrase because I didn't write it down and I'm going to probably get it wrong, but it is, right. People overestimate events and they underestimate patterns. And you're right. The discernment is, okay, so what is that pattern? What is that trend? What is this thing that's going on? And that's going to tie into something else that you actually asked probably 10 minutes ago, which is like this question about, the shift in city managers' roles and responsibilities. And yeah, I think we grew up in the pattern was, okay, the council sets the community vision and they are the stewards of the strategic plan and they hold it. And then what we have learned is that election cycles happen. In 2 years, you might have different people and the plan might change. And so, but the one common thread through that strategic plan or through that vision or through that comp plan or through that whatever is tended to be the city manager bridged that gap for a lot of people. And so the manager became the steward of the plan and the historian of where we're going. which was sort of different than the upbringing, which is, do the will of the council. And, as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, just do it. And that, I think, is a rub that we ought to wrestle with at a future episode. We ought to wrestle with events versus patterns versus movements, because I do have this little convention at work where, right, one's an event, two's a coincidence, three's a pattern. We gotta look at that, and then if something happens 4 times in a row, that's a movement. We gotta solve for that thing right away. So I think there's a lot of richness there, and I do kind of want to wrestle with okay, in an AI world, authenticity is probably going to be the currency that carries the most weight. So I don't know if I just opened a Pandora's box or if I just did 6 more hours of podcast topics, but
It
That's nothing.
feels like a Midwestern salad recipe just happened, right?
I don't actually. I do need a little bit of clarification because I'm familiar with coleslaw and potato salad. Are there more salads?
You are from Minnesota. How? Okay. All right. We're going to have to talk.
Okay. And the floating Jello salad reference I got, right?
Yeah.
These little bits of fruit that hang in this gelatinous, lovely goo.
Have you never had Oreo fluff or Watergate salad or
Things with marshmallows in them?
All right,
right?
Listeners, your challenge is to spam Mike LinkedIn through the podcast, however you want to catch us, and send him your favorite salad recipes, because I think his summer just got really flavorful.
There is one thing, and I know we're going to wrap up soon, and this is something maybe we can dive into more this summer as well. But Mike said something way back at the beginning of this episode, and it was it just doesn't feel right? That a resident or somebody says, I can't tell you why, but it just doesn't feel right. And I have actual belief in that line, and that's frustrating to me because I have been in circumstances where I can't articulate what it is, but it just doesn't feel right. And I have a gut feeling that's telling me to do something in a certain way, and I can't tell you why. And it's hideously annoying to the people who are sitting around a table or in a council room or whatever, who are like, you got to tell us. And you're like, I don't know, but it just doesn't feel good. I think there is, the older I get, the more of those feelings I have. And I don't know if they come from age and experience or they're just a naturally occurring thing, whatever. But when we talk about influencer versus influential, if we talk about real versus fake, AI versus authentic, as we talk about the struggles of building community and helping people to recognize their role and responsibility in maintaining that, there's a lot of it just doesn't feel right that exists. And I think it's a really important thing for us to remember and to find a space for in the conversation, because maybe we can discern, maybe we can pull at strings and try to understand, okay, let's tell us where that's coming from, or seek to understand more. But gut instinct and gut feeling is real. I will tell you, in my personal life and in my career, I can think back to 24 circumstances where I did not follow my gut and it was the wrong decision in doing so. And I couldn't tell you in the moment why, but that's a real feeling. And I've had this argument with many managers, many of whom are mentors of mine, who have said, sorry, that's not an okay way to do this. Our job is to be the logical, thoughtful, data-driven, mindful people. We can't have intuition. So I think I'd love to dive into how we manage intuition in a way that brings us to a conclusion. That is actually a learned, thoughtful conclusion, not just a gut feeling, but how that gut feeling advises it.
Intuition is one of my favorite topics because again, it's not rational, it's not black and white. It's very much an and instead of an or. And as you were talking, I flashed back to a very specific moment in my career when I had told a colleague, I'm like, I can't explain this to you, but I see the window. Like, I literally see the window. It was very metaphorically, of course, but I see the window. And if I don't take it, this opportunity is gone forever. Right. And as the story gets played out, it was the window. And there was nothing rational about how I explained it or couldn't explain it. But I just knew. And I knew a series of events was coming and I had to make a certain choice. And that choice wasn't without consequences, but it was back to discernment. It was the best of the choices I had available to me. And as I've talked with that person over time passing, they're like, you were right. Like, and there was nothing rational about that moment or that explanation, but it was right.
Okay, so that is going to be book number 2, right? You have or, and then you have and like I'm joking, I'm teasing. I don't want to put titles to your books.
Number 2 is about coherence, which is everything we're talking about, which is beautiful.
Well, good. I'm glad we can continue to foster your intellectual curiosities. So you started us on this journey, Corey. We didn't finish it. What can our listeners expect next? Where are we headed? Because and that's a very polite way for me to say, I'm not sure where we're headed. So I'm looking to you for some answers.
I don't know that I have answers either, but I will. So we work with the bots a lot. The bots are my creative coworkers because the dogs don't talk to me very much, at least about this kind of stuff. But I had written down 2 versions of discernment. And so I think that will help guide us as we head into kind of the summer series. And so kind of the holistic version of discernment was the capacity to distinguish what is true, what is right, or what matters most when information is incomplete, competing, or unclear. And so I think that covers beautifully everything we've talked about. But when you put it into kind of the recipe of city management or local government leadership, here's a little twist on the definition. The practiced capacity to recognize what truth is speaking, what horizon it belongs to, and what it's actually asking of you without collapsing the tension before it is finished teaching you something. And so I think where we're headed is probably some or and work. We'll probably do some more case study work. I think digging in the way we did with data centers was a good scratch the surface, but there are probably a dozen more where we can think out loud and help other people kind of wrestle with those topics in their community and really start to focus on how to build discernment. It's a skill. This is not Excel. This is not robots tell me what decision to make. It's learning to trust your intuition within reason. It's learning how to temper your own bias or at least acknowledge that you have bias. I think the most important thing, it's being willing to slow down enough to be able to actually see the horizon. Because right now, with everything changing so much, one of the first essays I wrote for Substack, the line that started it all for me was, the noise is so loud, I can't hear anything. And I think we're living in that space. And so I think our summer arc is really about discernment as a practice skill. And then how we can provide examples of how we approach it or how others can think differently about things. And that is the vision I have on a fly.
Let's cook.
Well, some of us may be going to Hawaii or something really fun. But yes,
For
it
a
is
short
officially
time.
summer. Yeah.
It is officially summer.
It is officially summer. It is hot. It is humid. It is 81 degrees inside my own house right now. So I am cooking, literally and figuratively. But I appreciate both of you for any number of reasons. But like we can go from sort of a quasi silly episode to a really serious kind of meaty one, and I think there's some richness in that, and there's some value that comes from the rigor. So for our listeners, thank you very much. Please like and subscribe, give us some feedback, help us grow our reach, because this is a space for you. And you and your colleagues. So the more that you can share, the better we can be. And so give us some feedback, give us some suggestions. We are grateful for all of you. That's it. We will see you on episode 39 next week. Thanks.